Parang may nakalimutan ako. Oo nga pala, may assignment pa nga pala ako. Kailangan ko mag-research tungkol sa neoliberalism. Teka nga.
Neoliberalism in 1970s. It was also called neoclassical liberalism dahil ni-revive nito yung idea ng economic liberalism na nag-fail dati. When we say economic liberalism, ang idea nito ay more on principles of personal liberty, private property, at nililimatahan nito yung panghihimasok ng gobyerno. Ang economic liberalism kasi, ang ine-emphasize dito ay yung liberty natin mula sa mga government regulations. However, dahil nga nag-fail ditong idea ng economic liberalism, nagkaroon ng idea of neoliberalism, which is not just simply to revive the previous idea of economic liberalism, but to provide with better plans and strategies. Sabi dito, mas consistent, mas coherent, and mas morally ambitious daw itong idea of neoliberalism kaysa sa traditional na economic liberalism. Also, here in neoliberalism, mas pinapatatag daw nito yung commitment natin when it comes to both individual rights and economic liberty. Sinasabi rin na itong neoclassical liberalism or neoliberalism ay counter-revolutionary dahil ang aim nito ay ihinto at kung maaari ay i-reverse yung present na kalakaran ng gobyerno patungo sa greater government intervention na magbe-benefit ang lahat. Ang ina-emphasize ngayon dito sa idea ng neoclassical liberalism ay yung pagiging beneficial ng pagkakaroon ng mga free markets, open economies, and privatization of private businesses. Ang strategy kasi ng idea na to ay magkaroon ng kalayaan yung mga markets mula sa government's control and regulations para raw makagalaw yung mga capital, goods, and services ng malaya para magkaroon ng opportunity sa mas malawakang international trade. Noon namang 19th century, itong neoliberalism ay nagkaroon ng malaking impact sa mga bansang USA and UK. Dito kasi sa USA and UK is matatag yung mga free market sa mga bansang to. Kaya na-adapt din nila agad yung idea of neoliberalism. However, sa case kasi ng UK, mayroon silang Thatcherism, and sa USA naman is mayroon silang Reaganism. Alam naman natin na ang Thatcherism and ang Reaganism are both social philosophies na under ng conservatism. So, ang conservatism kasi is an arm of right-wing, di ba? So, sa case ng Thatcherism sa UK and Reaganism sa USA, naging bahagi ang neoliberalism ng isang mas malaki at bagong right ideology na naghahangad na pagsamahin ng laissez-faire economics at ang conservative social philosophy. Nevertheless, hindi raw masasabing arm of the new right itong neoclassical liberalism dahil mas wide daw yung foundation ng ideology na to. Especially dahil nahubog nga ito mula sa economic globalization. And ang neoliberalism din ay nagkaroon ng malaking epekto sa mga liberal and socialist parties as well as sa mga conservative ones. And naging sobrang influential din ito sa mga Anglo-American countries kung saan ipinanganak ang neoliberalism.
Good morning.
Walang good sa morning, pre.
Bakit naman walang good sa morning?
Napakamahal ng gasolina ngayon.
Mahal ng gasolina ngayon?
Oo, napakataas.
Nako, mahal nga ngayon ng pre.
Alam mo, problema ako eh.
Did you know that this is an example of neoliberalism? Neoliberalism supports free enterprises that leads to competition of businesses, which causes higher prices of goods and services. Now, these are the characteristics of neoliberalism's market. First, markets are self-regulating. Markets without government intervention are said to be self-regulating, which is nice dahil maraming bagay ang kailangang i-manage at i-coordinate. Kung harmonize ang market natin, may iwasan yung involvement ng politicians sa economic activities ng bansa. Also, it avoid conflict of interest kasi may mga politicians na may family business din. Second, the market is naturally efficient and productive. At macroeconomic level, efficient ang market economy kasi yung resources ay na-utilize for maximum profit at may incentive to work ang rich and poor. Pag sa macroeconomic level naman, inherently na mas efficient ang private business kaysa sa public bodies dahil profit-driven sila. Also, it forced them to keep the cost low. Third, markets are responsive, even democratic mechanisms. Dito, kung ano ang gusto ng consumers at willing to buy sila, iyon lang ang ilalabas ng producers sa presyo afford ng masa. Also, the business competition is healthy. Lastly, fourth, markets deliver fairness and economic justice. Binibigyan ng market ang tao ng opportunity na umunlad base sa kanilang talent at hard work.
Hirap nyo ba kanina? Napakahirap yung ginawa ko sa kremlo. Oo.
Nakatapos ka naman.
Okay naman. Basic.
Nice.
Ano naman ako?
Uy nga pala, may ibebenta ako sa inyo. 50 pesos lang to.
Ano naman yan? Wala na nga akong pera eh.
Sige na, bilhin nyo na.
Magkano ba yan?
50.
50? Naman.
50 lang eh.
Para ka naman, ano eh? Mahal-mahal eh.
Yan.
Sige na.
Sa'yo na yan.
Change na yan.
Thank you.
Sige.
Sige. Salamat.
Ano ba ito?
Ano nga ba yan?
Parang bulak eh. Ganyan natin.
Teka. Ito lasa, pre.
Wala naman lasa to eh. Mahal-mahal, wala naman lasa.
Oo nga, parang lasang harina.
Did you know that this is the real-life example of neoliberalism? The Milton Friedman doctrine, to be specific, which means na yung neoliberalism equates to profit over people's welfare. Producers only produce goods and services which will benefit only them and not their consumers.
Benta ngayon. Benta. Tara na.
Oo nga, tara na.
Neoliberalism amounts to a form of market fundamentalism by which na yung market must be superior to any government control. Bale, ito ay naka-form base sa classical economic theory na naniniwala sa self-regulation ng market. One of the inspiration behind this thought is Adam Smith, which is known as the father of economics. Kahit na nirecognize ito ang limitation ng market, ay naniniwala ito na ang means of production and distribution ay dapat privately owned at hindi nababahiran ng regulation ng government sa larangan ng kalakalan. From the neoliberal perspective, they believe na ang defect of government on controlling the economy are many and various. Like kapag may panahon ng crisis, there should be no monetary policy or framework to affect the economy. Free market economists such as Frederic P and the US economist Milton Friedman attack the economic role of government. From Frederic P perspective, kinikriticize niya ang central planning sa larangan ng economy dahil sa pagiging inefficient na state bureaucracies. Kahit na ang competent pa ng gobyerno ang pamamaraan dito, ay nako-confronted pa din ito due to range of complexity of information that is simply beyond their capacity to handle. Hayek viewed economic intervention as the single most serious threat to individual liberty. Dahil inaatip dito kontrolin ng economic life kung saan may ganap ang estado which ultimately leading to totalitarianism. From Milton Friedman perspective naman, i-criticize naman nito ang Keynesian on the grounds that tax and spend policies fuel inflation by encouraging governments to increase borrowing without in the process affecting the natural rates of unemployment. Public choice theories influenced by utilitarianism had questioned the legitimacy of government by challenging its relationship to the public interest. They believed that yung government official could use their position to further their own ends rather than those of the general public. This suggests that the growth of big government was not so much a response to the democratic pressure, nor an attempt to correct what's imbalance of capitalism, but was rather a consequence of the pursuit of careers, self-interest by public sector workers generally.
Alam mo, Aubrey, parang naisip ko lang ngayon. Parang gusto mag-business. Kaso lang, inisip ko, ano yung method na kailangan kong sundin para makakuha ng maraming target market?
Feeling ko mag-post ka sa FB or mag-online live selling ka. Di ba uso yun ngayon?
Oo, online selling.
Ano, epekto ng globalization, di ba?
Oo, tama yung globalization.
Teka lang, makisingit ako ah. Maganda yung idea na yan, pre. Kasi isipin mo, Sa panahon kasi ngayon, lalo na, yung globalization yung talaga na-develop na sa atin. Yung business na naisip mo, sobrang maging accessible na yan. Number one, usong-uso na yung mga live selling. Yung tinatawag na marketplace sa Facebook. O, di ba? Napakadali mo nang ibenta yung mga products mo. Kaya, maganda yan.
Did you know that commercial activities is an example of globalization? And it is also one of the most efficient methods of producing and supplying goods and services by neoliberal policies.
Iniisip ko,
Oo nga, tama yun.
Tama yung suggestion, pre. Salamat sa mga suggestion. Nice one.
Okay, so the term neoliberalism refers to the various principles underlying how a particular state takes place in terms of free market and the free trade. So, it also discusses the factors of how the state would be beneficial to it. No? So, one of the most prominent component ng neoliberalism ay ang globalization. So, what is globalization and how does globalization supports the idea of how neoliberal policies works? Okay, so it primarily focuses on the advancement of the community and the people, but there is always a significant gap between the measurable outcomes of economic globalization and the proposed benefits. So, although neoliberal policies have created enormous wealth for some people, they have largely failed to benefit those living in extreme poverty. So, ito yung pinaka-downside. Ayan, sabi ko nila, merong gap. So, when it comes sa neoliberal policy, meron siyang gap, may pros and cons. And yung cons neto ay, yun nga, na hindi lahat nagbe-benefit ng equally, kagaya ng mga mga benefits na natitake ng mga nasa matataas na classes, gaya ng sa government, or yung mga tao na kaya ma-attain yung mga bagay na gusto nilang ma-attain, which is a great example dito is yung mga businessman or people with enough funds to financially capacity to sustain their lifestyle. So, next naman dito ay market forces and commercial activities are promoted as the most efficient method of producing and supplying goods and services by neoliberal policies. Simultaneously, they reject the role of the state and oppose the government intervention, so that, kumbaga parang naniniwala kasi sila na ang isang neoliberal policy ay dapat na may maintain ang relationship nito sa government. So, sa pamamaraan nito ay dinidisregard nila. So, the policies were quickly adopted by governments and continue to pervade classical economic thought, allowing corporations in wealthy countries to secure a financial advantage to the global economy. In conclusion, ang neoliberal ideology lang naman ay nagre-represent sa outmoded selfish economic model. It was developed by old imperial powers and adopted by economically dominant countries, giving the current state of the global trade and financial structures. Now, wealthy countries can maintain their economic advantage by pressuring developing countries to adopt neoliberal policies, even if they do not. Many commentators understandably have referred to this process as economic colonialism.
And now, as we expound the connection between neoliberalism and globalization, atin lamang tatandaan ang technical term na ito na nagsasabing ang kanilang economic and political processes are under the umbrella of globalization. With a short recap, ating alalahanin na ang neoliberalism ay nag-refer sa market-oriented reform policies na mayroong ideas na associated with free market capitalism. And relating to globalization, sa globalization kinakailangan ng malawak at pandaigdigang ugnayan para mas mapalawak at mapagtibay ang ekonomiya ng bawat bansa. And doon pa lamang makikita na natin na they are closely related to one another. Pero ang history nito is that in the process that reached its peak in the 1990s with a massive market-based reconstructing of economies. Pero paano nga ba nangyari yun? Dahil places such post-communist states in the Eastern Europe, in Latin America, and in much more of developing world acquired neoliberal ideology with the use of globalization. And moving forward, makikita rin natin dito na ang neoliberal globalization nga daw ay mayroong economic and normative elements of neoliberalism across the globe that are influenced by neoliberal globalization itself. Pero, paano nga ba nila na-influensyan ang neoliberalism itself? Why? Because most neoliberals support globalization in it, as it is the emphasis on values such as increased production efficiency, free flow of currency, free trades, markets, positive sum outcomes of markets, and individual empowerment. And lastly, nandito rin kasi yung policy that promotes private control of industry, minimal government interference in the running of economy, and the removal of taxes, tariffs, and restrictive regulations that discourage international buying and selling of goods and services, and the encouragement of foreign investment. Tuloy na sabi natin kanina, ang globalization ay closely related to neoliberalism as they are more into connection with the foreign investments. And lastly, tatandaan lamang natin itong dalawang bagay na ito in terms of neoliberals. They are not taxed the implications for democracy of the growing power of transitional corporations with any meaningful notion of human flourishing. And lastly, may threat posed to economic and cultural diversity by the emergence of global goods and the trend towards merger and monopoly. And that's all. That's the wrap for our report, and we hope that we have helped you a lot for these informations. Thank you and have a nice day.